First of all, my big gratitude to the organizers of the forum, not only for inviting me yet again, but also for maintaining the topic of women, peace and security as the topic of one of the plenary panels. I think that type of commitment from the organizations is very, very important to ensure that this issue doesn't get relegated to the secondary drawer. We have an excellent panel today, and I'll introduce them very briefly. You have their full biographies in your conference packages. But let me start with Ambassador Miroslava Beham. She is the Senior Gender Advisor at the OSCE in Vienna, and she previously was the representative, the Ambassador of Serbia to the OSCE. So, Ambassador Beham, welcome. Then we have Elisabeth Nauclér, who is a representative of the Autonomous Territory, thank you, Autonomous Territory of the Åland Islands in the Finnish Parliament. The Åland Islands, for those who don't know, are a Swedish-speaking part of Finland, and they have very interesting dynamics that Elisabeth Nauclér has managed to bring to the rest of the world, to different countries that are right now struggling or dealing with minority and nationalist movements within their own borders, which is a very, very good experience. And last but not least, I have here Constanze. Sorry, yes, I'm Spanish, so I'm not.
Constanze.
Yeah, Constanze. No, it's the last name that is difficult.
Stelzenmüller.
Who is a Senior Transatlantic Fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Berlin, and she is also the Director of the Transatlantic Trends Program of the German Marshall Fund. Besides their current employment, our panelists have a really broad set of experiences that we'll bring to the discussion, which is on 1325. Can 1325 be a new frame of reference, both at the local, at the global level, and back? Is there this feedback loop in between the international concept of 1325 as an international tool and the use of 1325 as a tool for change at the local and national level? Next year, we will celebrate the 15th anniversary of Resolution 1325, and anniversaries, particularly those that end in 0 and 5, are good moments for reflection and to look back and to see, first of all, has the resolution and the attendant resolutions afterwards, have they been useful the way they were intended to be? And second, has the international community used the potential of those resolutions to create an impact, to create a transformational change on the way we deal with conflict, peace, and security? At this point, I think it's useful as a reminder, because we tend to forget that Resolution 1325 was not a resolution intended to promote the rights of women. It was a resolution intended to change the way in which the international community addressed conflict by broadening the audience, or by broadening the participation of those who could speak as to the nature of conflict, the resolution, and the prevention of conflict. So I would contend here, and that's something that I would like my panelists to address afterwards, have we forgotten about conflict prevention? Have we forgotten about conflict resolution? Is 1325 just a tool for the international community to respond after conflict, to put a patch on the wound rather than to prevent it from happening in the first place? So that would be the first question. Have we taken full advantage of 1325 as a tool to prevent and deal with conflict before it happens? And I would like Ambassador Beham to take on that question.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I would also like to thank the organizers for inviting me. And this morning, Sonja Licht paid tribute to 3 women from the European Union. and she did rightly so. But I would like to pay tribute to 3 Serbian women who are heading the organizations who organized this event. And I'm almost sure that it is due to the fact that they are women that we are sitting here and having a session on women, peace and security. And I may say that this puts the Belgrade Security Days at the forefront of similar events, because I know that comparable events have the problem of even finding women to participate, of participation of women, let alone talking about such a substance. You asked about the prevention of conflict that is encompassed also by Resolution 1325. I think this is an underused tool for sure. We in the OSCE, we have just finalized the study on existing national action plans in the OSCE region. We analyzed 27 existing national action plans. The result shows that the national action plans try to follow the 4 pillars concept of the Resolution 1325, which is participation, prevention, protection, and relief and recovery. And the study also shows that the national action plans focus mostly on the participation pillar and on relief and recovery, which means they are very much focused on outward activities in the framework of development, peace building, peacekeeping operations. The least used pillar, so to say, is prevention. And it is used in the national action plans only or almost only in the context of prevention of sexual violence. But of course, prevention is a very broad issue, and it encompasses all tools that are at our disposal to prevent conflict, starting from early warning through dialogue facilitation, mediation, etc. I think this is an absolutely underused tool. It has been established also in our, in our study. And one interesting issue is that if conflict prevention or prevention from Resolution 1325 is applied, then it is applied in countries where there has been a conflict, and it serves to avoid re-erupting of the conflict. So, but of course, so do we apply this in the South Caucasus and in the Balkans, but not in the European Union, conflict prevention? I mean, this is a tool that is actually meant to contribute to the stability of countries and of whole regions. So, yeah.
Very, very interesting observations, and I think that pretty much sets the stage for a follow-up question that maybe you can address, Ms. Nauclér. I mean, you've been involved through your work in a lot of, not only in conflict and post-conflict situations, but also in what we could call pre-potential conflict situations in which there are certain political tensions that may or may not erupt into open conflict. In your experience, does 1325 even enter the conversation in those types of processes? Is it something that is even considered part of the planning when you have a team of international mediators, or you have a team of trying to address the conflict before it happens?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for inviting me here. And as was already stated, There is a reason for paying tribute to 3 women in this context, and I agree very much with this. So I should really not start with complaining, but we are sitting here 3 women. We have a mediator who is a man, but I would claim that 1325 is not a gender issue. It is a security issue, and that is in the title of the resolution, and that was the aim of the resolution. It was not, as you rightly stated, it was not a women issue. So I don't think there should be only women in those panels, but despite that, I'm very happy to be here again. And when you ask if it is brought up in a preventive way and in the preventive context, of course the 1325 is all too little brought up, and we have paid all too little attention to it. But having said that, it is still a very important tool, and I think that at least in the part of the world from where I come, more and more attention is paid to 1325. There is a revision of the action plans, the national action plans. Finland has its 2nd action plan, Sweden the same thing, and there is a revision ongoing now. There is a cooperation on the Nordic level for having united approach to the questions, the shortcomings, and the proposals to the UN to have, for example, an SRSG on these issues for joint ideas and proposals in the UN. This is one way of moving forward, and this shows that it is important, because otherwise it hasn't been any joint work done on this. And when it comes to, for example, you're mentioning mediation, Finland has been in the forefront when it comes to mediation. And we don't only have an action plan for 1325, we also have an action plan on mediation. And we have presented a proposal for mediation also in the OSCE, and that has been accepted by the Parliamentary Assembly. And this is the peace initiative it is called, the joint initiative by Turkey and Friends of Mediation in the UN is also bringing 1325 into the concept, into the discussions. And I think that the Finnish foreign minister and also the other ministers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they are not having one single speech without bringing up the issue of women and the importance of women into the process, whether they mention 1325 or not. So I am absolutely convinced that at least in our part of the world, they are taking these initiatives and they are taking it seriously, and they are trying to expand it.
Thank you. Well, comes as no surprise to anybody that the Nordics are at the forefront of the effort, which has been the case since the year 2000, pretty much, when the resolution was first passed. Constanze, let me turn to you. So, in addition to your role, as a senior transatlantic fellow, you were the chairwoman of Women International Security in Germany. Women International Security, most of you probably are familiar, is an organization that brings together women who work particularly in leadership positions in the hardcore world of security. To what extent is that capacity that is collected by WISE utilized when the international community needs expertise on security issues, particularly in conflict prevention?
Well, you raise a very interesting question. I have always thought that Germany, as a major and sort of postmodern, post-industrialized Western country, has been significantly behind the curve when compared with countries like the United States, the UK, France, and certainly the Nordic countries when it comes to women's participation in pretty much anything, but particularly in foreign and security policy. I started out life after going to law school as a journalist and did foreign and security policy and hard security issues, and for quite a while I was the only woman of my kind working in a national paper. Going to Central Africa and the Balkans and elsewhere. That has now changed. It's fairly simple what the explanation for this was. I'm going to be very blunt about this, certain Nazi ideology is about motherhood and not working if you have children, held on for very long in post-war Germany. It's very simple. My German friends had to defend themselves if they wanted to work in ways that my French friends, British and American friends, or Swedish friends didn't. That is now changing, though. What Elisabeth has just been describing in terms of social change is now happening in my country as well. But I have seen it happen, and I'd say I'd seen it happen in the last 10 years. And it was the last German foreign minister who didn't do many good things, but one good thing that he did do was to try and actively promote women into senior foreign service jobs, including into security jobs. And as a result, the German Foreign Ministry for the first time had a state secretary, female, who's now moved to the Interior Ministry, and had a number of Referatsleiterinnen, division heads, who now, and it's now become something almost not worthy of comment. And there are many more younger women going into the field of foreign and security policy, both studying it and working in it. So I think that this change, the catch-up has happened within the last decade, and I've been able to watch it, and I hope I've been able to contribute to it somewhat. But the reality is, I think, that if we say that Resolution 1325 is about preventing conflict and is about security and not so much about gender participation, I think we have to be a lot more self-critical when it comes to our ability as Western nations to engage in successful conflict prevention. And I'd say the record on that, frankly, has been pretty bleak. We have learned how to resolve conflicts, but we have mostly been horribly surprised by them. And we have not been able to apply the lessons of those conflicts to others. It seems to me that what we are witnessing now in Ukraine is a perfect example of that, of us not applying the lessons from the Balkans, for example. I'll leave it at that.
I'm sure it won't stay as that. But
no, I'm sure you have more to discuss about that.
I think you bring a very good point about what 1325 is really about, and as we've said, the whole idea behind 1325 was to transform the way in which we as a community of human beings deal with conflict, and it was by broadening the group of people that have the right to sit at the table and discuss how to approach conflict resolution, conflict prevention. Now, when we talk 1325, particularly we're talking about defense matters, the first thing that comes up is 10%, 5%, 7%, 13%, 20%, meaning how many women we have in uniform in the armed forces. Now, I am pretty sure that the people who were thinking and drafting 1325, that's not what they had in mind. It's not how do we bring women into the paradigm of security that we have today, but how do we change the paradigm of security by bringing in women as one of those underserved constituencies. So my next question would be to the three of you, and please take the floor in any order. To what extent have we failed at that?
Yeah, I can go back again to the study that that we did, it shows clearly that there is still maybe a lack of understanding of this potential of Security Council Resolution 1325, that it is a different approach to conflict prevention, but also to conflict resolution and also post-conflict rehabilitation. And it shows that the study has shown that the Resolution 1325 is understood as a women's rights resolution and mostly as a matter of participation. So if we increase the number of women, we implement one of the commitments of Resolution 1325. But I was always thinking maybe that states who develop, for example, national action plans need more guidance on that, also to understand what is the background. I know that there are a lot of tools that have been developed in the last almost 15 years on how to implement Resolution 1325 or to explain it and so on. But I think it's still not being understood that in a conflict you have a population that suffers, and in many countries women are even more than half of this population, and they are affected by the conflict and they are affected differently. And at the same time they can also, with different issues, contribute to any peace process or any kind of negotiation. So if you see what is still the case, negotiating parties or round tables with national dialogues, having only men participate, is a sign that 1325 has not arrived everywhere. I want to come back to something that Elisabeth said about the participation of men, of course. So I don't say that if a national dialogue round table does not have women, that there are not men who can also address these issues that have to be addressed. Pardon?
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Yes, I know you're one of them, of course. I think that all in all, this approach, the 1325 approach, is being reduced to participation and then, as I said in the beginning, the relief and recovery part.
It's interesting that you bring up the why men are not as involved. I see in the Twitter feed that somebody, Alexandrina, mentions why is it only women in the room. Actually, I have to say there are quite a number of men, but definitely the balance is more on the female side, which is, I guess, the story that we're used to. Now that I'm talking about the Twitter feed, those of you who installed the mobile application, you can send questions to the panel anytime you want. I can see them here in my screen, and I will feed them to the panel as they come. Not all of them, but those that we have the time to answer. Let me get back to you, Elisabeth. Do you have anything on?
Well, when you are saying that we have not, I should say we have not arrived everywhere with 1325. I think that the example of the UN-administrated territory of Kosovo is an interesting example where UN did, despite the intentions, and despite 1325, they omitted to include women in these institutions as they should have done, but the present organization has been able to do it. So there is a quite strong, I think, will and to address these questions now. And if you look into the security apparatus of Kosovo today, with the police and with the whole security, you have affirmative actions taken to increase the number of policemen. I think that there is something like 14–15% today, and they are increasing. And I think this is an interesting example, because the UN passed a resolution and had a territory that they were in control of and failed to implement it, but the one taking over the local population is doing it. This is very encouraging. So even if there was a shortcoming from the UN side and not implementing the resolution, this is of course much more important. And the UN resolution in itself is not, this is just the starting point of a process. And as I said, the revision of the plans, the national action plans, the revision is as important as the first, passing the first plan, because this is about moving the goals forward, and it is not just a question of figures. We can have such goals in the beginning, saying we should have so and so many percentage of this and that, and look at us, we have the best figures, as we are always saying in Finland, and that is true, you know. But despite that, it is not a question of the figures, but it is a question of the content, and therefore we have to change our goals. So I think the process in itself, even if you can find shortcomings, is important.
Thank you. Constanze.
Well, I have to say, I'm listening to you, my thoughts were sort of running off at a tangent. As a student of international law and a long-time observer of conflicts as a journalist, my sense is that we are talking a little bit in a bubble, and I'll try and explain what I mean by that. What I think I have been observing for the last 10 years is a denormativization of international conflict. In other words, a rollback of international norms, a rollback of international regulations, at a time when the world has grown closer together through integration and globalization. That, to me, is in fact, one of the great risk factors, and possibly a factor contributing to new conflicts. And it strikes me as something, if you will forgive my brutality in saying so, as something of a luxury problem, to ask ourselves whether we are including women enough, and whether an input-oriented criterion is good enough, or whether we should be looking more at the output, as I think Miroslava would suggest. I mean, this is fine. I'm all for this, but I have to admit that I lose a lot more sleep over the larger context of this deterioration of the international normative system. Let me give you one example. I wrote my law school thesis on the law of the sea. Things going on in the high seas and the deep seas these days are very conflict-prone, and we are seeing no signs of anybody being willing to engage in a renegotiation of these conflict-prone topics. And so I think we are lucky to have Resolution 1325, but we ought to be far more worried, I think, about our inability to, as nation states and as highly developed Western nation states, to recognize impending conflicts, to contain them, and to contain them with classical means of diplomacy, much less normative means.
Well, I couldn't more than agree with you, but I think this also goes hand in hand. I think that of course, you can call it a luxury problem to get women involved, but I think women can make a difference also. Not just one woman here and there, but that the women, very often 50% of the population. And I think that if you bring also the women perspective into, it is not a question of having so and so many soldiers or having so and so many policemen or having so and so many fighter pilots or whatever it is, but it is about decision making. It is about getting women into the decision making from the very beginning, to build the society, to be state builders. And I think that this, I'm an immigrant in Finland. I moved to Finland, and I'm one of the few who has made it to the parliament because of our system. So I may look at Finland from another point of view than if I was born in Finland, and so I may be more fascinated than a Finn, originally a Finn would be, but I'm fascinated by the history of Finland being the country where women had full political rights. As the first country in the world, we could stand in the election and could vote, and we had 19 women in the first parliament more than 100 years ago, with no affirmative actions and no quotas, etc. And we've held all the important positions in the country: president and president of the Supreme Court and Speaker of the Parliament and Bishop and Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, etc., etc. And maybe not every single one of these women has made a difference to the society, but of course it has made a difference to the society overall together. And since last week we have 10 female ministers and 7 men. We were the first country in the world having a majority of women in the government, but since the changes last week, it is 10-7. And of course, this has made a difference. Even if I couldn't more than agree on the focus you have on the main problems, you're absolutely right about that, but I still think that women makes a difference.
Yeah. I would like to slightly disagree with what Constanze said about that this is a luxury issue. And I would argue exactly with the international normative system that provides for a framework for women's rights and and equality. And we have CEDAW, we have the Beijing Platform for Action, we have a really comprehensive normative framework that calls for gender equality. If you want so, the Resolution 1325 is also a consequence of this normative framework. Irregardless of what we do, we have to take this into account. And if we want to really stick and implement the international standards, we have to find ways how to do it. This is one side. So there is there are provisions, there is international law or an international legal framework for that. And the other side is that including women has, women's perspectives, women's needs, etc., it has a potential that has not been exhausted. I mean, for me, a good example is I can't prove that it would have been different if there has been a man, but I think what Catherine Ashton succeeded in doing, in bringing closer Pristina and Belgrade, was due to the fact that she has a different approach to that. That she had a certain feeling how to do it, and well, maybe also some kind of skills that are specific maybe to women. Another issue is I was in Ukraine just 3 weeks ago, and the OSCE has a special monitoring mission there, and we have a gender advisor, and we are also working on including gender issues into the monitoring of the mission, and we have been also asked to do so by Ukrainian authorities, and also not only to look at what is the situation of women, but what is the situation of men. So what psychological effects or impact did the conflict have on men? How can they reintegrate and so on? But what was very interesting for me was that in Odessa, for example, there has been an initiative led by women who managed to de-escalate the conflict there. After the events, I think it was in May, where it was really very probable that the conflict will spill over to Odessa. It were women who managed to de-escalate. So there is a potential, and this should also be exploited. And you can do it in very concrete ways. It's not a theory, but you have to see where is this potential. You have to find it and identify it and work with it. And this is what we in the OSCE try to do. And of course there has been, this is also something that I wanted to say, there has been a lot of improvement on the gender issue. If I just think about the conflict in former Yugoslavia in the mid-90s or in the first half of the 90s, gender issues were not even at the horizon. I mean, and it was one of the conflicts, I think, that also accelerated this development towards Resolution 1325. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I may say that these women who organized this conference here were those who reached out to the other side of the front and to try to network and who tried to do something. And if this had been picked up at that time by stakeholders outside from former Yugoslavia in the right way, it could have had a much better impact, maybe.
Well, maybe we should be looking at Russian women's networks.
Yes, absolutely.
And reaching out to those.
No, I mean, if the generals in the 1990s had been women here, everything would have been different. But I would also like to say that we are very much talking about 1325, but of course also the work that is done within the OSCE and the action plan from 2004 is equally important. It is, the UN resolution includes many more, and they are not only, I shouldn't say include, but they are bound by it. Many more countries than in the OSCE, but the OSCE is a very important regional stakeholder and an organization that is involved exactly in this piece of the process. And so the work that is being done in the OSCE with the action plan from 2004 as a milestone and with the wider action plan on women is being very, very important.
Let me change a little bit the approach or the topic to deal with this global to local, local to global, very confusing statement in the title. And let me explain. Let's try to explain it with an example. My organization has been working with NATO on issues of integration of a gender perspective in NATO for the last 7 years or so. And we've noticed something curious there. You have 1325, which is an internationally developed concept, was developed at the UN with a coalition of NGOs and governments from different countries, from different continents, as a matter of fact. That resolution made it then to countries through national action plans, not to all the countries, but in principle, particularly in the early 2000s, to just a few more countries that are more progressive in that sense. And then through some of those countries who were members of NATO, it made it into NATO. Then NATO tried to adapt it as an international institution and to create standards that then it can recommend to the rest of the member countries to adopt. So we have this process of filtering up of, so first filtering down from the international to the national, then up from the national to the international, and then back down as a set of standards or recommendations, which I think is a quite complex process, but it seems to have been the natural way in which 1325 or the principles of women, peace, and security more broadly have been promoted. Also, organizations such as the OSCE have done a lot of work with its members in trying to disseminate certain standards. Do you think that dynamic is dead now? That we've reached a point in which there's, as judged maybe by the number of national action plans that we have, that we've been stuck at 20-something, for quite a while, and there doesn't seem to be more initiative. That dynamic of feeding in between the national and international is dead? Would you like to start, or Elisabeth?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from the perspective of the OSCE, and I can confirm that there is a dynamic that what we develop in the OSCE, also in cooperation with other international organizations, is fed into the local and is coming back then in the form of a national action plan that is again, or any other strategy, that is again becoming part of an international framework or so. There has, so as I said, there are 27 national action plans in the OSCE region, and there are several others in the making. What we do is that we try to do capacity building. I mean, DCAF does this as well, and we sometimes also cooperate. We do capacity building, and now in Ukraine, for example, because there was this wish addressed to us to develop a national action plan, which I find is the right time to do that, because through a national action plan, first, it's a good entry point for a reform process in the security sector, for example, but it is also the right time to develop an approach to reconciliation and post-conflict rehabilitation, where women will be also included, where there is a diversity of stakeholders that would cover the whole population there, and in this way make this process more sustainable. And we are now also learning from this experience in Ukraine, and trying also to adapt our work to the needs. We want to be as effective as possible. So there is this correlation or interrelation between the local and the global. And as I said, just now that actually also Resolution 1325 was developed because one realized that there were problems on the ground that have to be somehow tackled, and this was then put put into this resolution.
Elisabeth.
Well, as I don't think it's like the end, because I don't think there is a beginning and an end. I think it is a process, and that the process goes up and down, so to say. It goes from the local level to the national, to the supranational, and back again. And because it's just an exercise, and we can count these national action plans. You have 20, you said you have 27 in the OSCE, and there are something a bit less than 50 in the whole world. And I've read that the best national action plan is the one Nepal. But I'm not familiar to it, so I can't guarantee that this is true, but this is what I've read. Anyway, it's a question of sharing best practices, comparing, benchmarking, changing, coming to joint initiatives. So no, it's not the end. This goes up and down, it comes back, and that's the whole issue. It's an exercise to come to a common view on this and to change the whole system.
Let me add a footnote to 1325 and then play the contrarian role again. I think that one key achievement of 1325 has also been pinpointing the problem of sexual violence in relation to peacekeeping troops. As you will recall, in the big UN peacekeeping operations in the 90s, when I was a young journalist, and we all thought that the United Nations were going to be a future world government and the blue helmets were going to be something like a UN world army, people were horrified to find out that these blue helmets, when they moved into conflict zones, started going, building bordellos. And that the girls servicing these brothels would be local girls. In other words, that the soldiers who were supposed to keep the peace and contain the conflict or end it were actually contributing to some huge social problems. And 1325 has helped pinpoint that as a problem and to deal and to frame it as something that is unacceptable and needs to be fought. That's not a minor achievement, frankly. And I think it's something that is an ongoing issue and needs to be dealt with on an ongoing basis. And we all, and perhaps to cite another example that was a little closer to home, we also know that in the camps during the Yugoslav war, forced prostitution was also a very large issue, and endemic rape. You know that this was in fact the subject of court cases in the Hague Tribunal. That, I think, is a very serious achievement, and one that, as we know, because this issue is endemic, will remain with us. On the other hand, I think that the problem of female exclusion is one that can't just be addressed with a UN resolution. From my own experience, I remember one particularly poignant case. I wrote for a while about what we all at the time somewhat naively thought was a successful revolution in Eritrea, where a small and determined country had declared its independence from a very large country that was supported by both the Soviets and by the Americans, and so the Eritreans had everybody against them, not just the Ethiopians, but the Americans and the Soviets as well, and they were considered very glamorous because they had women fighters. And the women, these were infantry fighters, and they were photographed by the entire world press because they were often good-looking and wore very short trousers, and this was, a favorite subject for press reports. Now, after Eritrean independence, I wanted to find out what had happened to these women, and whether they had whether they had benefited from the peace or not. And guess what? They hadn't, of course. It turned out that Eritrean society was a lot more conservative than you would think. These women, because they had grown up in conflict, had never been circumcised. Therefore, they were social outcasts. Therefore, they could not get married. Therefore, their families disowned them. And they didn't even have the glamorous title of combatant. They were parking lot attendants and basically were begging in parking lots or had been farmed out to encampments somewhere out in the desert. So that I just mentioned that example as a salutary reminder that normative frameworks alone don't facilitate social change. Sometimes it's the social change that facilitates the normative frameworks. And we have to watch these things very, very carefully and be on the lookout for excluded groups. And those may be women, but they can be others as well, to make sure that we aren't ignoring them. And in my personal journalistic experience, that is more often the case than not.
If I may add to that, that is, of course, the first thing that comes into to our minds when we talk about 1325, that is woman as a victim of war, that is a sexual abuse, that's the rape as a weapon of the war, that is about the zero tolerance of the staff using prostitutes, etc. And the first thing that has to be addressed is, of course, before sending out people on mission, they have to have education, and this is definitely a result. I'm not saying that this is fulfilled, not at all, but it has taken place and it's a result of 1325 in many ways. And the victims, there is another approach, and there has been a lot more attention paid to the victims. And this is, of course, the most important. But as you know, we are sitting here at least believing that we are decision makers. And then we want to also concentrate on this decision-making capacity, and that is nothing can be changed before you change the decision makers. But I fully agree with you. But we are, of course, we are all unhappy that the SRSG on these issues has only the mandate for the victims and not for the rest of the decision makers. So we should absolutely not forget this was the main issue of 1325, but there is another side to the issue.
Thank you. If you allow me now, I'm going to, being cautious of the time, I'm going to bring the audience into the conversation. More than anything, because 3 members of the panel will have to rush immediately after, including myself, will have to rush to the airport immediately after the end of the panel. So I want to make sure that we have adequate time to take questions, comments. Just identify yourself, keep them brief and to the point. Here in the front we have.
Sonja Stojanović-Gajić. I have actually a question for all 3 speakers. Since Constanze is pragmatic in her remarks, I would challenge her to interpret Transatlantic Trends report in the spirit of women, peace and security for a decision maker, to show the relevance of her work, because I know she's not just a researcher but a policy advisor. So to be pragmatic about how can we interpret Transatlantic Trends findings. Question for Elisabeth. The title of this panel is, global to local, and Finland has done a lot at the national level, outside of Finland. But how is women, peace, security implemented locally, grassroots level in Finland, especially because you do have conflictual issues also at home? And last but not the least, to Ambassador Beham, I know you're in a difficult position in OSCE, trying to mainstream women, peace and security. And I would be keen to hear from you, how do you deal with those that might abuse the agenda? Putting, calling something a women, peace, security issue and actually using it for other purposes. I've seen, I'm not going to say that the trainings that the OSCE did on de-radicalization of women as potential terrorists is completely opposite to women, peace and security agenda, but it's quite far-fetched from participation in conflict resolution. So how do you bring them on the right track?
Thank you. Let's take a few questions here. Sonja Licht.
Sonja Licht, and I want to thank you for all the nice words, and for the 3 organizers to be so stubborn and keep this topic on the main agenda among one of the major panels. My question to you, very much referring also to what Constanze said about priorities. I fully agree that one has many sleepless nights about the old and new conflicts that are, in fact, really opening new kind of also security threats. But I am wondering whether, when we think of a different approach to security paradigm, and we obviously have to, the old one simply doesn't work. That was very well explained today during the panels as well. I wonder whether we should really put much more emphasis on what you were talking here today, and as Elisabeth said, it is not about gender. It is about different approach to security, a different security paradigm. I do not believe that this is taken seriously as long as I don't see similar panels at the Munich conference, at Halifax, at Brussels Forum, etc. So my question to you, dear ladies and gentlemen, what can we do together to make those who think policy and who are critical voices to take seriously this topic and really not leave the Belgrade Security Forum alone? Because with all due respect, we are very proud of what we are doing, but we know that this doesn't happen to be the most influential security forum in the world. And I am wondering, how can we change those who really decide about what will happen with the normative framework, and whether they will normatize or whatever, deregulate also, which I am very worried about, many of the security issues. Or we really have to try to influence them in a much tougher way. There are important women around. I pay tribute to the three, which I find very important in different ways, including Chancellor Merkel. She was the first on my list. I think, I'm not sure that she will become, part of our little community easily. But I think we really have to try, and not only with her, but with both men and women. My question is, so what to do, and whether something can be done. My second question is about a topic that was not mentioned, and that is quite often forgotten, I think, in our debates. This is the role of minority women. Because and this is especially for Elisabeth, I happen to know that she taught a lot about these issues, but also for the others. Because I have a feeling that this is being quite often forgotten.
And let's take one more back there, please. Back in there.
Thank you very much. I'm Gordana Subotic from Association The Idea. I would like to actually give an answer or experience, my personal experience, on the question that you raised during the panel, and that is the resolution 1325 applied in trying to address the conflict that happened. I can give my personal experience. In 2015, we were actually, because women were not involved in the negotiations between Pristina and in Belgrade, and as women's organizations, a group of women's organizations here in Belgrade, we tried to affect the whole process and say we are not there. I'm talking about organizations that are 20 years active in peace building. And we also had a partner, Kosovo Women's Network, in this letter, and we wrote a letter to the government, and we also wrote it to Catherine Ashton. And her answer here was that European Union, because we considered, and Kvinna till Kvinna, Swedish organization that joined the letter, we considered that not only that it is in a Serbian National Action Plan that 30% of women are required to be there at the table in the time of negotiations. And her answer was that the European Union considers it's very important to have women, and gave us examples of women in high positions. For example, Tanja Miščević, she was appointed in 2013 for negotiations as a chief negotiator for European Union. And I can say for women, there are 200,000 women, 200,000 people that are internally displaced from Kosovo, and half of this number are women. And I can tell you that for these women, is no significance is Tanja Mišević in this position in negotiations with European Union. So everywhere where I pose this question is I get, okay, this woman is in this position, but for me and for these internally displaced women that live here now and they're not integrated, this is out of the question. It doesn't mean anything. So my question is, this was my statement and experience, and my question is like, whose role is to mention 1325 in process of solving of the conflict? For example, in Ukraine, we have conflict ongoing, and I don't see and don't hear mentioning of the resolution 1325, even though it has to deal not only 1325, but we have another 6 resolutions that explicitly deal with conflict and women in conflict. So whose role is to do that? Is it Catherine Ashton? Because she didn't give us proper answer to that. And for example, in peace negotiations in Kosovo, whose role was to raise where are the women in these negotiations? So thank you very much. This was my question.
Who would like to start? Let me start on this side because I always default to Miroslava.
Okay. I have to, I'm afraid, default on the transatlantic trends question for the simple reason that whenever we have tested gender differences, which we can on the trends, they don't come up with anything terribly interesting. We haven't found that women have sort of dramatically different preferences than men. The generational differences tend to be more important. But if you are interested in specifics, you can go to the website and pick up the data, the aggregate data, and then cross-tab those against gender. If you're interested in country-specific data, you can get those from the 3 universities that store the country data as well. On Ms. Subotic, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, point, I have to say my tendency is to simply agree with you. I mean, you ought to have been included. I don't see why not. And of course, it is for your practical interests and for your local framing completely irrelevant who's the Serbian Europe negotiator. Yes, that I get. That's not a satisfactory answer. I'd like to linger a little bit over Sonja Licht's question. Minority women, I agree with you, but I would extend that to all minorities. It's a huge issue, but I think it's an issue that we have with the Roma. I would also say it's an issue that we have with Russian minorities in Europe. Again, to be a little bit provocative, European soft power is going to have to keep in mind that if we are not able to make Europeans of large Russian minorities in our countries, then our soft power or the effect of our soft power to the east is going to be somewhat limited. So I'm concerned about the treatment of any kind of minority anywhere. This is a very, very big deal. It's part of who we are. It's one of the essentials of the European identity, is that minorities are respected, protected, and included. Then on your larger question, Sonja, of how do we change our approaches to security? My personal observation over the last, nearly two decades that I've been writing about security issues is that we seem to have become stuck in a crisis management mode, one where we prefer informal fixes to institutional and architectural fixes because those are too complicated and because our institutions are getting more and more members and therefore consensus building and decision making is more and more complicated. So we like to look for escape routes that are informal and those in fact have worked quite well here in the Balkans, the Quads, the Quints, the Sectets and so on. But we, as a result, I think we've let the formal processes, not just the normative frameworks, but the institutions and the decision-making processes wither away somewhat. And I think we do that at our peril. So while this may sound somewhat old-fashioned and conservative, one of my recommendations would be that, representative democracy is a damn good thing, and so are institutions and democratic processes. We've disrespected them for quite a while, and I think that if we make sure that those work well, they ought to be inclusive as well. That's part of the definition of them working well. And I think that it is time for a swing back of the pendulum on that particular front. And one way in which you can then put that more specifically for the security issue is that it seems to me that our national, even the large nation states in Europe and the West, are finding it increasingly difficult to keep any part of their foreign and security deliberating process protected from this permanent 24/7 crisis management mode, where my diplomat friends will say, Constance, I just don't have the time to sit down and think. I have to go do things all the time. So I think it might be healthy for all of us if we looked again at how good our planning staff are and our planning processes and our strategy making processes, and make sure that those are given enough space and time to think, and are also and that their thinking is then fed into the crisis management, because otherwise we'll find ourselves stuck in situations that we didn't want to get into in the first place. Sorry, this is a very general and somewhat academic way of framing it, but I think the practitioners among you know exactly what I'm talking about, because I hear that a lot from my diplomat friends. I hope that helps.
So if I should first answer the question about Finland and about how the situation, we are always proud of our figures. And especially being an immigrant in Finland, I like to present the good things and not criticize Finland. But of course, there is a lot of things that we have to look at ourselves on, and we have many things that we could improve. For example, it is no secrecy. On the contrary, this is in the CEDAW report that Finland is being criticized for the violence at home. And they are saying to us, how can you have been in charge, how can you have been holding all these posts in the Finnish society? You have these records, you've been in the parliament for over 100 years, and you haven't been able to change this. How can you have these awful figures when it comes to violence? And so there are many shortcomings, that is no question about that. And also when it comes to the parliament, as I'm saying, we're on the record of having all these posts. But if you look at the most important commissions in the parliament, for example, well, one of them I think is held by a woman now, but there are absolutely, it is not 50-50, far from it. But I think that what is important is that we are able to acknowledge it, and we are talking about it, we are very much focusing about it, and I think that 1325 and similar discussions is improving also the situation, but just by the fact that you are pinpointing these things. And I think it boils down to the local society also. We have been very much avoiding quotas in Finland, and in some other countries they say we don't want to wait for 8 years. So I think that a quota is, of course, a necessary thing for a transitional period if you want to change on a local level, that it is too time consuming to wait for the changes otherwise. So yes, we do have things that we should combat also in Finland, but I think that we are ready to discuss them thanks to all these processes. About the question about women in Kosovo and now women in the process in Ukraine. As I said, the UN failed entirely to implement 1325 into the police and the security organization of Kosovo, though they were in charge of the territory. I think that, but the local, when they took over in Kosovo themselves, they have been able to make the change. And I think this is also depicting the process, the ongoing process now, so to say. It has something to do with the time. And I think that there is a change when it comes to Ukraine. Not that there is naturally a change, not that you will see women being generals and women at the negotiators' table and etc. But I think that the demand from the international community is different. And I think that the approach from the OSCE, and I think that the approach from the OSCE has to be different in Ukraine than it was by the UN in former Yugoslavia. So I think that we have moved forward in this process, not saying that it is perfect at all. And I'm saving the question from Sonia until the last, but unfortunately, I think we'll miss our plane if I start to talk about this, because this is of course, my favorite topic about minorities, being coming from these islands, having a minority solution within Finland, and been concentrating on minority issues. Whether you are a woman coming from a minority, of course, it matters. In some contexts, and in some contexts, it doesn't really matter. I think it is no difference for me if I'm a man or a woman in the parliament for the fact that I represent a minority. But in others, this is definitely important. And this tend to be some minorities, like the Romas, they have, of course, always had the same position. And you can see we're also, when it comes to this, very proud of our position in Finland when it comes to Roma. You know that Roma are mentioned in our constitution even, and we have comparatively good, a good record. And I think that some of these issues, like the Romas, could be addressed through addressing young people, through the next generation, education. Many of these minorities are minorities in such a position that they are because of the lack of education. I think the education is the key to a lot of things, to integration. Everyone don't want to be integrated, but integrated in the way that they can survive with their own culture, etc., in the society. And then I think that education and the next generation is the key, that are the key words to the solution for these questions. When you come to other minority questions, it is totally different. If you talk about conflict areas and you talk about the upcoming interest for independence here and there in the world, I think that, and especially in the European Union, I think that the European Union has not succeeded in making us Europeans. We are more interested to come from Vojvodina than from coming from, now that was not an example from the European Union, but people are more interested in telling from which region they come than from which country they come, because they can't accept to say that we are Europeans. We haven't come to that. This is a paradox in the globalized world where borders should be less and less important. And we will see a lot more of upcoming conflicts and discussions on these issues, and most of them are minority questions. So I think we have to be prepared for a dialogue, prepared for discussing with these people, and also not always say no to everything. There has to be special solutions yeah, special solutions. But this, I would like to continue for some more hours, if I may.
Yes, we didn't have a flight waiting for us, but Miroslava.
I start with Sonja Stojanovic's question, though I'm not really sure I understood what you mean. We have been working to really include a gender perspective in all issues that OSCE addresses. I'm a practitioner. I always talk about very practical things. So, and we had also different events that included or addressed the issue of women in terrorism, the role of women as terrorists and the role of women as those who can work in preventing terrorism. I mean, this is the way we think that women can be included also in conflict prevention. I'm not sure what you meant by the abuse of gender issues in this respect. So we work also on the de-radicalization of women, because they have been there are problems in some areas of the OSCE where women have been abused, of course, or have been forced into being terrorists. This is an issue that we address. I'm sure I see in your face that this was not the right answer, but we can talk afterwards about that. The other questions that were raised, the role of minority women, I can also speak a little bit from my own background or experience, because I was born as a Serb in Germany and grew up there and was a migrant actually all my life. There is an issue of the manifold discrimination of minority and migrant women. And there have been tools developed that can assist minority women or migrant women to be empowered. Of course, the legal framework has to be there to acknowledge that there is a double or manifold discrimination of women. We have also worked now with Roma women to find, to identify Roma women who can be mentored and whom we can help to get a voice also in where it has to be heard, this voice. So we think that this is a very, very important issue, and we work on that. About the IDPs in Serbia, I don't know, we have a representative of the OSCE mission in Serbia here. And I think that there are issues that have been addressed also through this mission. But I must admit, because I was at that time when the solution about or so to say the last chapter of displacement here in the Balkans was solved, that the displaced persons from Kosovo were not here in Serbia, or the IDPs in Serbia were not included, and that there was also not a special perspective on gender in that process, on women. In that process. This was an initiative between the EU, UNHCR, and the OSCE, and it was not very well gender mainstreamed, I must admit. It was not really addressing the specific issues and needs of women, and excluded totally the IDPs from Kosovo who are in Serbia. And yeah, I may, before I answer Sonja Licht's question, which is the $1 million question, I would like to refer to what Sonja Stojanovic asked you about the those states who have developed national action plans but do not focus on internal issues. I think this is a very, very important question because it is, I think, first misinterpreting Resolution 1325, or it's a pick and choose approach. So you take what you think is best for you, or is in compliance with your policy approaches, but it does not really cover what Resolution 1325 asks. We had last year a conference on 1325 in Almaty with representatives from Central Asia, South Caucasus, the Western Balkans, but also from some Western OSCE participating states. And there was the US representative there who explained or presented the new US National Action Plan. And when I asked her why it is focused only on peacekeeping operations and peace building and relief and recovery in countries that were affected by conflict, and why it does not encompass, for example, the whole security sector and the armed forces of the United States. I mean, this is a real problem not only in the United States, in many other countries, the armed forces of a country. She said, well, then we would have never had a national action plan. So it is an issue that has to be addressed, but that people do not like, some countries do not like to address. On the other hand, I have to say, there was also at the same conference the representations of the national action plans by Serbia and Georgia, and there the countries were forced by external stakeholders to reform their domestic security sector. So to take exactly these issues into account that the others ignored. So, and I know that this is also a discussion that is being led in UN Women, and that yeah, will go on. And now about how to make the Munich Security Conference, how to gender mainstream it, I don't know really. I mean, you set an example, and this is why I said you're really at the forefront of these comparable events. But if you look into the audience, all the people who were sitting here this morning are not here anymore. So those who came are interested specifically in this issue, and those who are not interested, they do not listen. And those who have to actually learn. I think, I mean, it's still a matter of awareness raising. We deal with it every day in the OSCE, also with OSCE staff and OSCE delegations. I think that the United Nations are also doing quite well in this awareness raising initiatives, and it is still, we have to talk about that and find ways, entry points into yeah, these events.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we run out of time, and we have a hard deadline, so we can't take any more answers. Any more questions from the audience. Now, to the panel, I would just give about 20 seconds each. Remember, we're being tweeted live, so if you can give your closing statement in 140 characters or less, I'm sure the tweeters will appreciate it. Constanze, would you like to start here?
I think a lot has been achieved. There's a great deal of work still to be done. It starts with women, but it doesn't end there.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We should lead by example. Only 9 out of 28 candidates for being commissioner in the European Union were women. We should expand the mandate, and we should not only have a goal, but we should continue the process.
Excellent, thank you.
There is no sustainable peace and security if you do not take into account the needs and fears and potentials of half of the population.
Thank you very much to all. My suggestion for the organizers is that next year you give people, in order to have lunch, they have to show the little stamp that they've gone to the 1325 panel, and otherwise they don't get any lunch. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the organizers and to the audience. Thank you.